So, yeah, and usually when I read from Trauma Head, I gave myself the gift when this book came out, knowing that as I was going on book tour, that it would be tempting for me to jump into sort of like the highest flashpoint of drama of this one-year narrative. And I knew that if I was touring across North America doing this night after night, I was going to get re-traumatized. So I allowed myself the joy of, on my very first launch event, opening at page 1 and reading for a certain number of pages. And then at the next event, I picked up where I left off. And every time I do a full read of this book, I put a little line to show how many times I've read the full book through. And what that's done for me has given me the full scape of the narrative of healing, rather than just holding me in the moment of trauma and shock. It's gotten me familiar with the book. And it's also made things easier as I get ready to go do a reading. I'm not agonizing over what I'm going to read. I mean, people put a lot of stress and a lot of energy into this. So giving myself that gift allowed me to be calmer on actual reading days and to support my being centered. So I'm going to do something atypical today that I've literally never done before, which is read 3 discrete different poems from this book that are not in order. And I thought I would start with this epigraph, or it's not an epigraph, it's a poem I made out of Soren Kierkegaard's Either Or. I refer to Soren Kierkegaard as the patron saint of the bummed out. He really experienced depression in a lot of ways. And I just thought that opening with this would sort of connect me to the field of mentors and thinkers who've come before me, who have grappled with a lot of the things that many of us have. So here's Kierkegaard. I do not care for anything. I do not care to ride, for the exercise is too violent. I do not care to walk. Walking is too strenuous. I do not care to lie down, for I should either have to remain lying, and I do not care to do that, or I should have to get up again, and I do not care to do that either. Summa summarum, I do not care at all. I just love that something written back in the 1800s is just, I think it totally sums up the COVID ennui that many of us felt. Okay, so I'll just quickly turn to read this poem, which is about having a migraine every day for a year. And the reason I want to read it is because it's kind of a sound poem, and it really represents to me what it felt like to have a migraine every year. So while living through this experience was hell, writing it was a complete playground. And if any of you are grappling with trying to bring your experiences, unpleasant experiences, to the page, I'm curious how that is going for you. And I also encourage anything that feels comfortable or good or fun or curious. I mean, you'll hear Isabella's beautiful work after this, and she can share that with you. Okay. My body is run body, fear body. I have miles of headaches, every day miles of headaches. I cannot run miles, headaches, miles of headaches, miles of headaches, miles of headaches. Pain walks miles of headaches, miles of fear aches, miles of headaches, miles of headaches, miles of heartaches, miles of heart. I cannot start miles of headaches, miles of headaches, miles of headaches, miles of headaches. I cannot run, heart cannot run, miles of headaches, 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 of headaches, of headaches, of aches. And then just jumping into a different part of finding a way to make the writing support me as an artist. I told you that my eyes were dilating and referencing at different times, and I was having trouble processing. So I got to print the poem several times upon itself, and to make the poem look like what I was feeling. So I'll try to give this a read. Pain wears me, is the tide chewing cliff face. Pain wears me. This injury tumbles me in the chop is the tide chewing cliff face. Any hiatus in the repetition of panic. This injury tumbles me in the chop is the tide. Left gleaming and new, polished through abrasion and the repetition of panic. This injury tumbles me in the chop is the tide chewing cliff face left gleaming and new. Any hiatus polished through abrasion and the repetition of panic. This injury tumbles me in the chop left gleaming and new. Any hiatus polished through abrasion and the repetition of panic left gleaming and new, polished through abrasion. And I think I'll end there.
That was so beautiful, Elee. And oh my gosh, like also like as someone like as so many of us, I think in this room it has experienced, it's like you just feel so much of that. Like where you're talking about the headaches and the repetition of it. I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna get a headache because it's like it's so common to us that like it's literally ingrained in us, like how that feels. Um but yeah, so we're gonna kind of like switch with like reading and response. And so, Elee, there was a few things that I wanted to ask you, but I think the one thing that is jumping out at me is, I mean, there's a lot of stereotypes in terms of people thinking that writing is a very lonely act, when in fact, a lot of poets in the actual community know that it is not like that at all. But likewise, illness can be a lot like that. Illness can be extremely sudden, and with that suddenness comes a lot of times that sense that you're thrust into this loneliness because suddenly you are the only person undergoing something that no one else can really relate to. And then, of course, it makes it even harder when you can't like talk to many people at a time, when you have migraines. That is further cutting off your socialization. So I'm wondering about, I guess, how you navigated that, and then how the poetry and the words come into play, both in terms of the writing process, any collaborations, and also like getting to be on tour and then sharing that with readings.
Well, you're right. It was lonely. I mean, I felt my whole extrovert sort of like, yay, party personality just flatline. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, is my lack of interest in the world, is it just depression? Is my injury in my brain? Where's my heart? Where's my being? If I'm not the Elee who laughs when she comes into a room, who actually am I? So really thinking about, what did this organ do to me, and like how do I frame and build this concept of myself if my personality has so changed? And of course, in all of that is the idea that what if it's not temporary? What if I am not the Elee that I have grown into being when this happened to me when I was 41? So that was lonely. And I also didn't really have the ability to connect with people very well. That's for sure. Slowly and slowlier and slowlier, I began making little steps towards finding situations that felt okay for me. And I realized, that old adage, Isabella, write the book that you need.
Yeah.
They always say, like, if you need representation or something. So
Yeah.
I ended up trying to find the people who understood what I was going through. And so I edited this book called Against Death, 35 Days on Living. So that was me trying to find other artists and thinkers who had come close to death, or who have been so like pressed up against death, they've either hugged it or pushed it away. But how could they articulate the thing that I felt I had come close to? And so taking on that act of editing and communicating deeply and carefully with people in a slow process was very confirming for me.
what year did that book come out again, Against Death?
Oh, I think it was, I actually have to look.
Yeah,
It
because
was
I think it was
2019.
like
It was
2019.
right, yeah, 2019. It was in December of 2019. And so like 3 months
Yeah,
before the pandemic hit. So we never
it's
went on book tour with it.
I know, but I think it was like just 2 years after you met me. And at the time, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is like a book Elee edited. Like now looking back, I'm like at the time, I could not imagine myself contributing to an anthology with that theme, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm
Yeah.
just like, oh, I'm like 3 years late for submission.
Yeah. I should make a second edition and you can write something for it.
Yeah. Do we have time for another question or should I proceed?
Yeah. Do you have a quick one?
Uh, Yeah, I mean, from your first book too, you've always been such a visual person when it comes to poetry. And of course, the ones you shared with us are so visual. And I'm just interested in the creative process. And when like artistic or new forms come up in like a surprising way during this process.
Yeah, I was very lucky to work with Anvil Press because they allowed me to explore moving the poems around on the page in a way that I'm not sure many presses would have.
Mm-hmm.
I've been like pulled more and more into visual work lately, probably because I had a good experience with Trauma Head, and I'm not sure. Again, I'll say I'm not sure that if this medical event, had happened to me, that I would have like dared to or
Yeah.
been forced to consider that.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, it was really clarifying. And I'm not trying to make a redemption story. Like I really resist a redemption story of like, somebody got sick and then they got better and it was the best thing that ever happened to them and it was a gift. I don't think that's a useful narrative or framework for us. But I will say that um, if this had to happen, I hit the lottery in the way that it happened in terms of my recovery and my ability to process it into art. And working with Angela Rawlings, who is a researcher, poet, sound poet in Iceland, allowed me to think about how to chew the world up with art. And that was the key to survival. And it's the thing that I will never let go of.
Yeah. I mean, I guess just jumping off of that point and into mine, like, I mean, whoever says cancer makes you stronger, it really does not make you stronger. Like, there's no redemption whatsoever. It's like, sure, I've got new work out of that. Do I want to undergo it again? Absolutely not. But so yeah, that's gonna be my portion of it. I'm gonna be sharing this work. It's kind of poetic, it's also kind of prosy, that I started kind of after my cancer diagnosis, almost like a year after like not being able to write prose anymore. Because of that, I think it's almost like around this time, it's almost just exactly 2 years since I was diagnosed with stage 2 renal cell carcinoma, which is a really rare form of cancer for people in my age. Um, and for like a couple years, I was also diagnosed with depression and anemia instead of the cancer, and so it went like unnoticed for so long. But this is um kind of about my experiences navigating the sick body but also healthcare. My entire writing is kind of written in the form of footnotes, and part of it footnotes my medical documents, part of it footnotes Roland Barthes' book The Lover's Discourse, where he writes about kind of the ways in which a person in love seeks and desires and thinks of, and longs for the beloved. But here I'm applying that his figure to that of the chronically ill body, saying that indeed there is still romantic love, um but there's also like the patient in love with the healthcare system, both killing it and saving it at the same time, or the patient longing for a former healthy body that it can no longer intersect in some ways. So I'm gonna start with that and we'll see how far I get. Subscript. My original voice does not appear in the body of this text about my body. That is because this text is composed of many texts in my medical files that others have written on me. In these spaces, I am too tired to be poet, writer, storyteller, but I try to tell the story of my symptoms and who I am in a compelling way. Some of the words I say are written down, some descriptions kept. The drafts of my experiences that I've curated going into my appointments are not the versions authorized, submitted, faxed over to me upon request. Over the course of long illness, I rely on the edits of medical shorthand to validate and advocate for me. If all goes well, nothing concrete will remain of the times I frequented in these bleached corridors. My presence is a specter, a footnote. I arrive on time and leave, and sometimes leave behind a vial or piece of a part of this body that will continue telling a story on my behalf, separate from, without me. Barthes writes, every contact for the lover raises the question of an answer. The skin is asked to reply. There are a lot of questions under my skin awaiting answers. Perhaps that is why I am behind a blue curtain, while my shoes and underwear are stowed in a blue garbage bag underneath the blue recliner bed, and I'm feeling very cold, too revealed. Perhaps blue is the answer. Perhaps my mass is blue, and that this is the beginning of a relationship I must learn to love with a system that is humongous, and with eyes and without eyes at the same time, and only sometimes with a heart that has and is and will put a frame around my most vulnerable, unfiltered, tendered portraits. The hospital at 7 a.m. is made up of many blue mornings and blue daylight, blue blankets and blue veins, tired ghosts blinking under sterile blue scrubs and sterile blue gowns. Some of the blue gowns have their blue strings missing. I will never forget this day, December 12th, 2021, and perhaps because somewhere in my early 20s, I still love this body. I do not want the answer or to wait for a reply. Even the Uber I rode in getting here was blue. A blue Tesla, Nissan, or Toyota, I don't remember. The driver asks me what is going on at the hospital, and I respond, not too sure, just a test today. He says, just a test is good. Nothing good ever happens there. Someone usually is dead. I have no answers to this. I don't say anymore. I look out to the window and at the rain, burrow inside the lyrics of Novo Amores repeat until death playing on my phone. Life is, in every sense, still ordinary. Life is good. Outside, it's beautiful. I do not love the situation I am in. If love is a disease, a hospital can perform every test and still not come up with the correct answers that Barthes, in his The Lover's Discourse, or any person in love might be searching for. Science has only observed that under a microscope, the crystalline makeup catalyzed by tears of sadness, tears of love, tears of joy, all have different chemical makeups. I am crying for most part of the day, silently, in my hospital bed. Morbidly, the morgue is beside the cafeteria. I am fed down a series of corridors past there into a dark, small room with medical imaging technology waiting for the technician. At the time of my biopsy, I ask if we can forego anesthesia because I have long been numb, long before the diagnosis. The clusters of grief forming their crystalline structures inside me, transparent crystalline carbon, unbreakable. Barthes writes, I can do everything with my language, but not with my body. If I cannot witness the procedure, I want to feel as if to commemorate, ritualize the removal of a tissue of the source of my pain. What will it be like to suction from my interior all the grief along with it? My request is denied. but the needle that penetrates far into my flesh and my renal cortex still elicits a yelp, followed by a syringe delivering more localized anesthesia. For 12 days, I proceed to wait for the results, unable to feel at all. On the 12th day, COVID-19 spreads to the office of my urology clinic, and my call goes to voicemail. I anticipate some more days of waiting, but I try not to be worried. My family doctor at the university clinic tells me that likely it's a fluid sac, a benign mass, that I am too young. I don't cry anymore. I tell myself that likely the phone call from my urologist will be a period to mark the end of a sentence in a minor speed bump chapter of my life. I'm curious what is on the other side of the microscope, marveled by how even the remotest nudging of fears can turn into such a sublime, engulfing present reality, that possibly an infinitesimal stain of tissue sample could dictate the remaining days of the rest of my life. The sentences delivered by my GP, who received the paperwork, and my urologist following up, do not carry any punctuations. My tears lose their distinct chemical structure. I cry the weight of all the feelings, all the crystalline patterns, perhaps none at all, or all at once. I will be okay. I text every important person in my life. Quote, BCC VA BC Cancer Vancouver Center, 600 West 10th Avenue, Vancouver, BC, Columbia, Vancouver, BC, V5Z 4E6. Document type, Oncology Medical Consult. Service date, time, 02 February 2022, 11:05. Result status, authentic, verified. This place is aftermath. This place is metastasis and circular windows elbowing cement walls of a west-facing building. It has a significant amount of light coming in on every floor. Inside, we are ones most likely in need of a few windows of light. Some of our bodies have stopped making the necessary chemicals that regulate and interpret temperature. We are cold, in need of sunlight for warmth, but for the most part, our bodies need light, that's all. This painting I love, entitled Avenue, hangs on the 5th floor of the building where I get my CTs at 3, then 4, then 6-month intervals. It's a landscape depicting elevations of red, crimson, and gold across some fluid strata of mountains, veins taking over the receding green of their valleys. The mountains have endured metasomatic changes, consciously or not, eco-poets might argue. At a certain point, medical science's term metastasis confronts this process wherein static and regulatory mechanisms in the body undergo paces of rapid change. Unlike metasomatism, metastasis suggests confinement within the parameters of the disease itself. A malignant cell starts out nanoscopic, invisible, confined to its host region. It starts out as a parasympathetic process, meaning you can be sick and not know that you're sick at all. Eventually, every patient stepping into this door of this building will experience an ordeal akin to the geologic permutations that take place in the lifespan of a mountain or rock. In metasomatism, changes take place in an entire rock's disposition because some of its chemical features are added or removed. Dilating, the rock of a tumorous growth transcends into a hard, somatic, and consciously felt reality. No longer confined, no longer invisible, the tissues, fat, bloodstream, it all feel the crimson coursing through the gold and red topography of their beings. Nothing's the same afterward. The whole body's affected. On this avenue of Broadway, I've carpooled, rode my first bus in grade 5, been hit with hail, cried under lamplit rain. I have purchased an umbrella, organic food, repaired a bike, met my friends for decade-long reunions. I've moved many times since, isolated, steering further away from this strip of the city during my undergrad, though years later, my reunion and reintegration with Broadway's West 10th Avenue is storied by my return as a patient. Laurent Fournier writes, quote, the writer's memory of their lived experience is one material among others, end quote. I am more than the stack of documents sent to me upon request. I am more than the 45-minute video on YouTube demonstrating a live radical nephrectomy for surgical med students. The video was entitled How to Perform a Left Radical Nephrectomy. Thereupon, I did not learn how to perform a left radical nephrectomy. And yet, over the course of sickness, anesthesia, treatment, and cognitive inhibitions distilling my bumpy recovery and aftermath, these references feel more autocomplete than I. They are body for the ghost of my own amnesiac recollections. I shall give my verified account now.
Wow, Isabella, I am so blown away by that. I had a smile on my face while you were reading, not because I was happy about what you're reading, but because I'm just so excited about what you're writing. So, I know your work well, your poetry, and I'm curious if you notice things in this project, if you can articulate how being sick has affected or changed or informed your writing.
Yeah, so kind of, it was wild because I had the biopsy like literally 2 days after my final assignment for that semester was due. And so 2 days before that biopsy, I literally emailed my prof saying like, I literally just have like a page left, but I can't write anymore. Like, this is what's going on. Like, I haven't told anyone, but I might have cancer. Can I please just have a deferral? And from that point on, for like a year, I couldn't write prose anymore. Like, it was an interesting time being still an undergrad in courses at certain points because I couldn't write full sentences. And my profs were very nice actually to navigate that. But for the first while, I actually just wrote poetry, kind of gathering like kind of parts of like my medical files and also feelings and emotions and the experience. Part of my second book was already done, and it was like writing on the deaths of 3 poets who passed away the week of Remembrance Day. One of whom was close in terms of my relations, and so it was already a really heavy time. And around the same time I got diagnosed, and so there was already poetry kind of for that manuscript, and so it kind of just became like a long poem of grief. It's not done. After a while I couldn't write poetry anymore, and so I basically haven't written much poetry in that sense for like a year. And around that sense, but at the same time, like, I still had a desire to kind of jog my experiences down on paper, almost so that my memory don't have to grasp onto it anymore. I can just let it go. And so I think it started with annotations, the footnotes, kind of me just like going through like my medical documents, seeing where it went. Because again, like, it was so overwhelming. Like, if I was to write a manuscript about what happened, it's like every single sentence wants to come out as the same sentence. Like, I just wouldn't know where to start. And so having something already there and then being able to grab onto it, it kind of mimics my experience as a patient telling the story, but not being able to dictate what is written down or what is left out. And at the same time, it gave me a little bit of like a frame and a structure so I can anchor myself a bit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like how you talk about bringing it to the page. And I wonder the flip side of that question is to think about how the writing affects you, not how your
Mm,
body affects the writing, but how does the writing affect your body? So, is
mhm.
there an instance of writing or being in writing um, that clarifies or heals or helps you through the medical process? And
Yeah.
conversely, you may want to answer the opposite question: what in writing harms, and how do we avoid that?
Yeah. I mean, this work has in general been pretty good because I'm able to write in my own time. And I mean, it's, very similar work from page to page in terms of what I'm doing, but the process is so different. Sometimes I can type a page out just there, and other times it goes for weeks and weeks, and you're just looking at the same sentence and I can't do anything. But when the writing does come out, it feels good. It's healing. I guess the flip side of that is like more like in the academic sense. This project is gonna be my master's thesis, but to get to that point, I have to do the coursework. And like before this session started, I was telling Elee and the folks on screen about how like difficult it is when professors kind of get they don't understand why you just like why like time is running out and you just can't get like a draft to them, when on this end it's like every sentence is literally a miracle. They have no idea. So there's kind of the flip side of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think narratives like this help explain
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Um, I know that we want to have a good, robust
Yeah.
Q&A, and also that we had thought about um, reading one last poem each. So should we do that, do you think? Read one last poem each and then go to the Q&A? Okay.
Mm.
So I thought I would close out by reading a poem about a cadaver. Bring it all home. Okay, so this is from my first book called Serpentine Loop. And this poem was the first poem published in Harvard Medical Journal in 40 years.
Whoa.
Yeah, I was actually like really delighted that they took this poem, and I tried to get them to include a link to body donation to the cadaver lab. They were like, no, we can't do that. But anyway, this is a conflation of some things that my mother has told me about her experience working on cadavers in anatomy lab, and also my grandfather, who was also a surgeon, and what his experience was like. And I think this little narrative poem really sums up for me how medical professionals sometimes have the front row seat at the spiritual arena in a way that we don't necessarily take
Mm.
um, stock of. So this is called Doppelganger. My grandfather smokes in the hospital. They all do. None realizing ash and nicotine violate the Hippocratic oath. Miss Fredericks, his nurse, presses his palm with instruments crafted in Europe. The heft of that icy metal slices through subcutaneous layers like a hymn. In the medical school photo, he stands beside a man, butterflied and propped as if struggling to rise, skin peeled from muscle and tendon, the cranium sawed and hinged upwards at an angle such that the dead man looks to be doffing his cap, a flirt, a cad. My grandfather beams a hero's smile, formaldehyde dripping from his elbows. Lunchtime, the repetitive prayer of hands to mouth. The smell sticks no matter how much I scrub. Others name the dead man Oscar, so he will have a name. Calluses on the palms and the ripple of muscle under skin suggest that he, dead at 43, was a hard worker. At other tables, students struggle with idiopathic structures and deviations. By end of semester, the trio identifies cherry red spots in Oscar's gray matter and determines he died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Every organ but this one lush, robust, and sound. At night, my grandfather stacks medical journals to the left of his bed. By morning, the pile stands on the right. I press him to tell me why he doesn't sleep while the world is still. He says he thinks of Oscar then, of all the Oscars, and the difference one man might make.
Beautiful. I'm actually gonna send that to my friend Oscar.
Oh,
Friend Oscar.
okay. Okay.
I'll
With
be
best
like,
wishes.
remember the difference that one man can make, Oscar. After you
Yeah.
go into the world.
That's right. Do you have a
I'm,
poem for us,
yeah,
Isabella?
I'm gonna read like the last bit of this. It's usually what I read as a conclusion. Now I can't find it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Barthes writes, everyone knows the story of the two halves trying to join themselves back together. I am not a perpetual planner. I run a committee for the orphanage of ghosts waiting to be adopted by the selves we once possessed. We feed each other saltwater taffy stretched vulnerable without breaking. Prepare collectively for changes that happen, will happen, is happening. Recovery is like this. There are those of us nearing 5 years, those of us who can't give up on the healthy, those of us in love, those of us afraid to love for the sake of the healthy, those of us undiagnosed, those of us biopsied, those of us moved to palliative care, those of us with hours left on morphine. This is a long illness that no one wishes to get. Beside a perfectly good healthcare system you've considered pretty stable until you get an illness like this. Not every one of us wants a pin, a bracelet, a cancer-free tattoo. There are some of us who wants one, but are informed at the start of an appointment that such milestones are no longer possible. Our ribbons come in many different colors to signify all the different places in our bodies that might one day be sick. Our illnesses leave us tired. That's one common symptom. Mitosis is the process at the equator where our day chromosomes into 2 days, and tomorrow is supposed to look identical. Meanwhile, I divide my body, abandon recipes of DNA, let lake swallow me in its green. This is one definition of consent. That's it.
Oh, thank you for that. That's beautiful. And I'm struck by the moving of color from blue, which you articulated so beautifully in the hospital with that early morning, all the different blues, and then coming through to green. It's really striking. Mm.
Thank you so much to both of you. I'm going to jump in to moderate the Q&A. But yeah, wow, I just obviously loved what you read, but I also really loved the care with which you asked each other questions that I think really got to the heart of each other's work and questions that have come up throughout Cross-Pollinations.